Hello, my name is Craig Thielen, and this is the 1% Better podcast. And today I've got Paul Batz back on the show.
Yeah.
Paul's the CEO of Good Leadership. It's a leadership coaching firm based in Minnesota. Paul, Happy New Year. We're just getting into the New Year's, and this is the first episode in season 3 of 1% Better.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this again. And congratulations. It's really been fun to see your stick-to-itiveness on this and to watch this podcast grow. It's obviously meeting a need. And I have really enjoyed, watching you grow and following along.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And this is all kind of coming full circle. So I think we're in our 35th episode. You were episode 2. So thanks for being brave. The first episode was a guy that I know, great guy, Shane Zutz, and he just did the season 2 recap. So
Okay.
that just aired. And so this is a very fitting that you're going to kick off season 3. You're both kind of going back to back here. So, well, hey, let's jump into it. You just completed a pretty big research project. I know you've been thinking about and planning, and it's been a huge project for you. So I want to talk about it's all around accountability.
Mhm.
So before we dig into that, because that's going to be a big topic, I want to just, take this opportunity. Here we are, in the new year, and just talk a little bit about, I know you're a very reflective person,
Mhm.
about 2024.
Yeah.
2024 seemed like, for me, a crazy year. Politically, geopolitically, socially, economically, technology. We're in the age of AI and a lot of different things that is really sort of going on in the world. So just wanted to get your thoughts. I know you've had some time over the holidays to kind of think
Mhm.
about last year and going forward, but what was 2024 for you?
I'm really glad you asked because I just completed writing the annual report for the business that we own, and we have a couple of investors and people who are always interested in that, including some of my children who are involved in the business. And I think it was a transformational year for us in the fact that it was centering. And the reason I say centering is because we've been doing this for 15 years, and we're in this value-added consulting space where no one actually really needs us. There's no technical requirements. There's no government regulation. We have to continually prove the value. And when you're a coaching firm or you basically have intellectual property, what you do is create this catharsis with your clients. Everything we do creates a cathartic shift. If they don't have an aha moment every time they come to us, then they don't come back. And so for us, we took a big risk in changing the structure of our firm so that we could execute, a world-class research project on a subject that no one had ever done before. And it took about 50% of our discretionary time to pull it off.
Wow, that's big.
It's a massive lift, and I'm happy with every single part of it. We watched our team grow. We had all sorts of lovely things happen in the firm. Somebody got married, somebody had a baby. It was really a centering year in a transformational way. And that includes sorting out all the political stuff and helping understand where our clients fell in all of that. So, yeah, thank you for asking. I really appreciate the opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah, and so that's great, and I know we're going to talk a lot about what came out of all of that investment of time. But how about, one of the things that I really love about the work that we do, and I think you do as well, is we get the opportunity to work with a lot of great organizations and great people and great leaders, and you tend to get a better perspective of the world because every company, every industry is at little different places, but then you can kind of take a step back and you can kind of look at the big picture. So what trends did you see in 2024 from just the clients that you worked on, the challenges, and kind of what they were going through?
This is a bold statement, but I've consistently seen since COVID, that teaming is more difficult. Nothing about being on a high-performing team, being a good team member, contributing to the sense of accountability of a team, none of it's getting easier. Everyone has so many different things going on, including our younger generation now. It's part of their normal to have a side hustle.
Yep.
So if you're asking somebody to really commit to a team to do extraordinary things, the side hustle is getting in the way. But it's also part of what you got to do. If you said they couldn't have the side hustle, they probably wouldn't be in your own firm. So, and I could go through, job title by job title. I could go industry by industry. we spend so much time helping people kind of restore that sense that this could be the best team I've ever been on, because there's so many things that chip away against teamwork these days. That's my biggest observation.
That's interesting. What about 25? What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing that people are thinking about and biggest opportunities?
We do a lot of work in healthcare, financial services, and a little bit in sports, hospitality, and entertainment. And without a doubt, the number one thing on everybody's mind is the changing regulations. How much things are going to change in the slightest, smallest ways. We have a very, very large client that owns a bunch of hospitality things, and the changes in the tax laws and how they can report things and even how they can charge their customers. It's going to be a plate tectonic shift in how that industry functions. And, the legislatures say they're firm, but they're also talking. What the heck does that mean? It just creates confusion. So, I think people are reasonably optimistic about the economic climate, but the regulatory environment, I think, is going to shift a lot in the next 18 months.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's very much, like you said, an industry specific topic. But it's a big topic. I know there's a lot of topic that has come up, discussion around tariffs and around, and there's always winners and losers whenever there's change, and there's always change, and there's always winners and losers, or at least perceived. And I think maybe it's people figuring out how do they adapt and adjust, and maybe that's a theme, is how we work in this space a lot, is how do we help organizations become more change enabled so that change is the norm. It's not this big seismic, we got to restructure every 10 years, and then it takes the whole organization such a long time to kind of recalibrate. But like, how do we just get into a mode of constant change, adapt, refine, this whole agility mindset?
Yeah. Well, I do think the ones that keep profiting in all this are my friends who are law firm partners. Those guys seem to never have a recession. Right. So we can all just agree to laugh at our friends who are in law firms and say, yeah, well, there you go.
They're easy to pick on, that's for sure.
You got it. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about this topic, accountability. It's really an interesting one, I think, because it's an age-old, challenge. But it's interesting that it hasn't really been written about a lot or really addressed in a meaningful way. And I know you've researched this, and love to hear about that. But it's like this word that's in the corporate lexicon. Is it a carrot? Is it a stick? What's the best technique? To be fair, I think it's a bad word in a lot of organizations, or it's become one. But yet, when you did the research, you found that largely everyone wants it. Everyone thinks it's something they are looking to be part of, but yet it's really hasn't been executed very well. So first of all, how did you even pick this topic, and tell us about that?
Yeah, awesome. Just a little bit of background. So our firm is called Good Leadership, and the definition of good leadership is when people, when people work together to create a result they couldn't create on their own. So it's about plural. It's about leadership in the plural sense. So then we also believe in goodness. And goodness, the definition of goodness in the organizational context is when people thrive together in a culture of encouragement, accountability, and positive teamwork. So the thriving together fits with good leadership. Also, positive teamwork fits with good leadership. Encouragement is always more powerful than not. It was the accountability thing that created so much mystery in the conversations about how to create higher performing organizations. And when we asked our clients about accountability, I can honestly say out of about 35 conversations, only one person said, yeah, we're not really worried about that around here. We seem to have that figured out. And so it caused me to go, what have you figured out that no one else can seem to get? And what I've learned is this is a very elusive and very complicated subject. And it's largely been clouded by just the general decline or increase in suspicion and investigative parts of our culture. Because when you hear the cry for accountability and name your atrocity that happens of the week, somebody in the media says somebody needs to be held accountable for this. There's nothing positive that you can build on from that phrase. It immediately is a punitive investigative concept that is only triggered by when something goes really wrong. And yet, organizations can't be effective if people aren't accountable.
Right.
And, the idea of personal ownership and the idea that we've been coaching around for a long time before we had the data is that the highest performing teams and cultures we've seen, people actually seek accountability.
Right.
And so it was the epicenter of that discussion and having that conversation about 18 months with our clients. People are saying, man, if you want to do something about this, tell us how we can help you. And, good leadership, we've been around for 15 years. We're, sort of a large, small business or a small, mid-sized business, depending how you look at it. Research projects on stuff like this cost a lot of money. And so I sent a letter to a bunch of clients and said, we're going to do this. Do you want to help? And what we asked them to do was to provide a leader who would help contribute to the project, to the think tank. We call it a steering team. We needed access into their organization. We needed them to refer us to other organizations to get access. And then we needed them to chip in. And so we had 15 different organizations that did that. And that really allowed us to, do a research project that you might expect somebody like Deloitte to do or somebody like maybe Workday. So we got to do it right. And that was super exciting. So that's the reason why we did it. A couple other but I know there's a lot of other things for us to talk about. So
yeah,
I don't
no,
do a lecture
that's
on
interesting
research.
though, that how you got onto it, but it makes sense. It was always part of your thinking. It was always part of your lexicon, but it just occurred to you like, wow, this is something that we really haven't figured out. Our clients haven't figured out. Let's dig in deeper. So that's from just practical experience. The one observation, so you pulled together a very nice, and thank you for sending me this workbook. I love it.
Yeah.
It's healthy accountability journal. And one of the observations I had just from reading the research and kind of going through it is there seems to be a fair amount of contradictions. People really, really want it. They think it's good and positive, yet it's terrible. It's considered negative. There's some that, collaboration, is obviously part of, good leadership. It's part of, frankly, the mantra of a lot of organizations, whether you want to be lean or agile or good leadership or name the framework, team of teams, is this whole idea of collaboration, putting responsibility, decision-making, intent-based leadership sometimes is called. So this notion of we want to really put it into the people closest to the customer, et cetera, but yet this other phrase that says accountability can't be shared, like that doesn't work. And so I want to dig into that. And then the rewards part of it is kind of another age-old thing that's connected to accountability. Like, how do you reward people? Is it your personal job? Is it your team job? Is it how you impacted the customer? And there seems to be a lot of like really intuitive sort of feedback there as well. So that's my observations, and that's part of the conundrum, right?
It is. So, without getting into all the fine tuning numbers, what I can tell you is that, this is not a generational problem.
Okay.
We had 4,000 people that were in our survey, people who were within 3 to 5 years of working, people who were within 3 to 5 years of leaving the workforce. And 95% of people said they really care about delivering quality work on time.
Right.
Okay, so that it's not a generational issue, and it's not that people, quote unquote, don't want to be accountable anymore. What they're telling us is that the way that executives behave and teams are led is so inconsistent that it creates a cynical approach. And people are like, well, why should I stick my neck out and really take personal ownership over this stuff if my teammates and specifically the senior executives in our organization aren't doing that? It's a contextual thing, like trying to plant a fresh new seed in soil that's just not very good. And so we're learning, what are the things that cause us to be able to start helping organizations understand that, people they want to be accountable. So we learn accountability is healthiest in a team environment. These are people that we really care about, that have our backs, and especially it's healthiest in a team that's committed to discipline follow through. So the healthy part of that, so we talk about healthy accountability is what every leader really wants in their organization.
Sure. Yeah.
It's what employees want.
Yeah.
So you need a system where people are actually going to help each other get the right and most important things done. Whenever we use the hold concept, it's punitive and negative. And what we're learning from the research is that 72% of people said they believe the spirit of accountability is punitive.
Yeah.
And 2/3 said it's reactive and therefore, investigative. So in order to make it healthy, it has to be forward thinking. In other words, planning and organizing ahead of time and seen as a growth experience. If I believe this is good for my growth, then you're going to allow me to fail a little bit in order to figure it out. And those two things tie together in the research perfectly. The higher people believe it's a growth experience where they'll be supported, whether they succeed immediately or not, is directly correlated to how healthy people assign accountability in their organization and how willing they are to take personal ownership. So there's a big shift we got to make. And, executive leaders have to spend a little bit more time, showing up, taking personal ownership for things, being visible, creating a spirit where people see that it's actually a good thing to be accountable, regardless of the results you produce, good, bad, or ugly.
I'm curious, Paul, when you engaged with, did you say about 15 different organizations, like in a pretty in-depth way?
Yeah, there were closer to 40 who contributed to the research, but the steering team was about 15.
15. So between 15 and 40, you got some really good insights. Number one, the question is, was this a topic that was really on the table, that was talked before this work, that was talked about, and let's get better, and how did it go last year? And it was kind of a meaning, just like, strategic planning or budgeting or some of these topics that we do every year, and it's on the table. Or was it something that was kind of buried, number one? And number two, I'm curious, at the end of the day, did it come down to just getting a line between top leadership, mid leadership, and team leadership to say, what does it actually mean to us? And are we all aligned on it? And are we actually all like behaving to match our intent?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So number one, this is the most immediately sticky subject I've ever dealt with in the 15 years of good leadership and the 10 years prior to that. Everyone wanted to be involved in this conversation. Even the company who said we do it right, they say, yeah, but we could learn a lot because the workforce is changing. A lot of our leaders are retiring soon. We think this is our lifeblood, but we know we have to approach it differently going forward. So, everyone wanted to be a part of this. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. It was amazing.
So it's important, and it had urgency, right? Because, the part of accountability that everyone should care about is every business wants some level of predictability. We have a goal. We got to hit the goal. No excuses. Like, that's the part that everyone wants, right?
Yes. And what we're learning is that alignment. So I love how you tied it to alignment. Alignment is critical, but it's actually not what makes people be accountable. Alignment is an intellectual concept. We agree on where we're headed. We agree on what the priorities are. We agree on who gets to use what resources. Alignment is an intellectual concept. And all the books that have been written about this have been written from that left brain planning and organizing disciplines of execution thing. And our clients were telling us loud and clear, it ain't working anymore.
Right.
So what was missing, in our opinion, was commitment planning. So alignment comes before commitment. Commitment comes before healthy accountability. And people need to know several things. They need to know, how is this connected to the priorities of the organization, this thing you're asking me to do? And more importantly, how is it connected to our outside customers? Because we all know we're going to be way more accountable to like clean up our room when we know mom's coming to visit than if it's just a random Tuesday and nobody's going to see.
Right.
Then they have to embrace
stick.
Yep, that's right. Then we have to embrace the support of other people. This idea of inspection cycles, it's an amazingly healthy concept in the context of accountability. It's like, I need to know where you're at. I'm going to help. I'm going to provide some expertise. I want you to be accountable, but I got to know what you're doing. And in a strong team, that concept is alive. And then you add the idea that people feel like if it's important, they need to know how, stretch me, help me grow. How is it going to help me be the person I want to be when I grow up? And I think that's the part where I'm 61 years old. I'm at the very end of the baby boomers. That's the part where I roll my eyes. That's not how I was raised. That's not how it worked in my world, but it needs to be that way now. If we can't learn to answer 4 or 5 why questions, if we can't learn to offer things up differently in such a way where the person sees how they're going to win and the team's going to win at the same time, then the idea that accountability with a generational difference is going to be healthy is very low.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point to draw out of it. So one of the things you said earlier is that one of the things they saw is maybe inconsistent application of accountability, or leadership wasn't following through.
Yep.
So, it's easy top down to say, hey, we want you all to be accountable for your numbers, your results.
Yep.
And then maybe inconsistently like apply it or have rewards or carrots and sticks. And then what about, top leaders, are they accountable? And so do they walk the walk? Do they talk the talk? And I guess my question is that leads us to some disconnects between how is this really a top-down conversation that we need clarity, but we also need to follow through? Because you said things like, well, we want it to support, our customers, our work. We want to support my personal career. But if this is just going to be a stick and this is just going to be a punitive thing and looking for blame, that doesn't feel very good. So isn't it a top-down conversation?
It's a meet in the middle conversation. So our hypothesis, the pre-research we did, 84% of the people we talked to, which was a very large group of people, said they believe accountability is best when it sits with you and your direct manager. Mm-hmm. And what we learned is that's profoundly unfair to the managers. There are so many, and if that's your strategy, you're failing. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to be that clear about it.
Yeah.
Based on what
I believe it.
Yep. So what we learned is that managers who create strong relationships in the team, where the team creates shared commitments to make sure they win together, that is 50% of the equation. And that was our hypothesis, and we absolutely proved it. What we missed, and maybe because these were senior leaders on the steering team, was how powerful positive role modeling from the senior most executives is. So here's what they expect. Number one, the priorities are very clear. And if you got 3 priorities, people can remember them. So as senior executives, we've got to reduce the complexity and narrow down to 3 priorities that we can repeat over and over again. And then we need to report how we're doing. We need to be visible, number one. Number 2, people need to know how we're doing on those priorities. And if you own it, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, they will say, hey, this is a healthy spirit of accountability. But if you're invisible, you don't have priorities, and you never report on them, people will say we have a very unhealthy spirit of accountability. So that's a big one.
That's a big one.
It's a big one. And it has proven out statistically to be the most significant piece in this whole piece. So we're shifting how we're thinking about accountability. We used to spend most of our time in alignment work. Now we're shifting over to spending it in commitment work, because you demonstrate your commitment in ways that are visible and consistent and transparent.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it can't just be top down, because you get into this, and we just went through it, and every company usually does it. The calendar years, you set your goals and your strategy, your goals, and your budgets for 25, and we all went through this exercise in different ways in organizations. And if a number is given to you, okay, and says, go do this, go do 20% growth or 50 or 5 or whatever, your context is, and you had no input into it, and you have no real, like, how are we going to do this? What's the why, number one, and 2, how do we do it? Do we invest? Do we, rejigger the team? What are the sort of the tactics? Well, then it just becomes a top down, go do it. And that's I think a lot of times what gets a real negative accountability is go do it. It's just like, go win the Super Bowl, but we're not going to give you any number 1 draft picks, and we're not going to go get any free agents, and just go and win the dang game, right? Yeah.
Well, I love how this conversation is going, because we're now starting to dig underneath to what is really there. And there's probably 3 things I should bring up here that were significant that I hope people can remember from this conversation. 1, the definition. We spotted several concepts that people said, yep, that's healthy accountability. So we put them together. So the
Okay.
definition of accountability, healthy accountability, now we confirmed this with our conference that we did back in November. We had people working with audience response technology and stuff. And this definition, when people win together, that's the first concept. It's not plural, it's not singular, it's plural. When people win together in an environment where individuals take personal ownership, embrace the support of their team,
Mm-hmm.
and deliver quality work on time. So 4 concepts: win together, individuals taking ownership, embracing the support of the team, and delivering quality work on time. And that's what we all want. And people said that's what we want to be a part of as well. What we're learning now, though, is research like this is only as good as the framework you create that brings it alive.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, there were 5 major concepts that surfaced. And rather than organize them into like a yellow brick road, we decided to organize this in what we call a pathway. And we're using the infinity symbol.
Okay.
So there's a loop on the left and a loop on the right, and they meet in the middle. And that intersection is where individuals want to seek accountability. So there are 2 organizational factors and 2 team factors that determine whether or not people want to. And they're pretty simple concepts, but hard to pull off. On the organizational side, senior role models need to be positive. Senior leaders need to be positive role models. Focus, communicate, own the data.
And that probably takes some coaching, right?
It does.
Because it's old. What we're really talking about is behavior change and culture.
Yep.
And so just because you have one conversation, you intellectually go, yeah, we didn't do it very good in the past, we need to do it better. It takes practice, coaching, feedback loops, right?
Yep. And the other thing on the organizational side is when we select new leaders from the outside and promote them, we need to promote them on the idea that they have a consistent record of being accountable. And what we're learning is that 2/3 of the people in the survey said, yeah, that's not alive in our organization.
Right.
So you get promoted for other things. So then on the team side, we already talked about teams committed to discipline follow through. That's very, very important. But we've got data that says just barely half of teams that we work with when we first meet them actually are committed to discipline follow through. So that's almost 50% who aren't. And then the last piece of this is that individuals today, they need to understand how committing to something important is actually tied to their growth. They're very thirsty. They're willing to learn a new language. They're willing to learn new ways of thinking if they believe it's important to their growth. If it's not positioned that way, they're like, yeah, well, that's not really my thing. And I think that's a powerful assertion. When all those come together, you can have a population of people who believe personal ownership is important and they will seek it in their job. And I think that's what you want and I want, Greg.
Yeah. Well, like you said, the vast majority, I think 90-some% said they want to have personal accountability and ownership. So it's just, it's not if, it's how do you make that environment that draws people in, that they feel comfortable, supported in it, versus I'm gonna kind of be skeptical. I'm going to be cautious. I'm going to be, I don't know if this is a good thing or bad thing. One thing you said I want to draw out a little bit though, you said at some point that accountability can't be shared. I think I know what that means, but in some ways it could be counterintuitive that, hey, we have all this collaboration and teamwork, but it can't be shared. So talk about that.
Yeah, so this is really, I think, the most important point and probably the final thing I'll share here today. And that is that what employees told us was the most unfair is when managers aren't willing to assign important work to the accountability to one person. And lots of things can be shared: values, planning, customer insights and stuff like that. But there was an origin story that started this whole project. And it turns out to be the main point of this whole thing. And I'll tell it as quickly as I can. CEO had been a client of ours many different times, runs a $1.5 billion professional services company that has a consumer product line. They had a supplier agreement that said they have 5 basic products that they used in every time they touch a customer. In their supplier agreement, if any of them failed or were not available, they had a window, 60 days, to develop a copycat product. And if they could do it in the window, they could cancel their agreement. So sure enough, the number one product that they needed failed. So they had some backlog. And so the CFO and the CEO said, let's try to do this. We got 60 days. Let's go. So CFO pulled together a team. They were all excited. They emphasized how the financial returns and the branding boost and all that stuff. And halfway through, everybody had been working really hard, but they made almost no progress. And so the CEO said, okay, this has got to change. Jumped in, took over, started barking orders, and they started going faster. He was so confident they were actually going to meet all the requirements and file on time with the Products Association. Tuesday, before the product was due to be registered on Friday noon, he bought a ticket to fly to Munich to go to the private equity firm's quarterly meeting. They own like 100 companies.
Okay.
He might have even told some people that he had some really good financial news, and he was kind of bragging up what his earnings were going to be. And while he was on the airplane, before it left out of here in Minneapolis, he got a text from a CFO saying, whoops, boss, sorry, we blew it. Something happened. We missed the filing. And as you can imagine, he was shocked and embarrassed and angry as hell. And his first thought was, who's going to lose their job over this? Who's going to get fired?
Right.
But after thinking about it in an intellectually honest way that happens to those of us who fly over oceans, eventually he stopped being angry and he realized nobody's going to get fired over this. This is cultural. If I'm honest, this stuff has happened before, and that supply chain manager we have is an absolute bully. What happened was a younger person in product marketing was the last person who had a lot of things to do to get the label right, to get it registered correctly. Well, the supply chain person was bullying her in such a way, she decided to just shut her computer and take a mental health day. Wow. Middle of the day, didn't tell anybody, no one followed up. And so he said, well, if anybody's going to get fired over this, it has to be me because I didn't make it clear. And then he thought about the airplane he was on. It's like nobody would get on this airplane if it wasn't really clear who the pilot was and who was supposed to land. So the metaphor for this entire project has become only one pilot lands the plane.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and the idea
is not a team decision, right?
No, it is not. And it's not a call for rugged individualism. If you think about it, a pilot flies with a flight plan. And the pilot wants the best expertise from the people on the ground, both where you're leaving and where you're landing. Mm-hmm. They want the people in the air to be coordinated and committed to their jobs. And they especially want somebody to criticize them if they think they're doing something that's going to put everybody in jeopardy. In their own self-interest, they want to put the plane down safely.
Yeah.
And just that one phrase has already started a catalytic change in all the clients we've been working with. So you start asking.
Because it makes sense. Like it's a visible, physical thing that everyone gets. Like there's still a team. A flight crew is still a team. There's feedback loops. There's systems. There's processes. But they're accountable to their role. They're not all accountable to land the plane.
No, they're not. And, the idea here that we all have recurring problems in our organizations. But if you ask the question, who's the pilot? A lot of times people will go, there's 4 of us who are supposed to be working on that. Well, that's not the answer. And it has really become the rallying cry for why, and especially because the data told us loud and clear, what people think is the most unhealthy is when the clear roles and responsibilities are not present, and especially who is the pilot. So it's been a very exciting project. It's difficult to try to make sense of ambiguous things. And this whole accountability subject, I'm being as honest as I can be by saying it took us 17 months of talking about it, interviewing, surveying, and then trying to make sense out of this data to figure out. But I believe there are simple things organizations can do to create a much healthier spirit of accountability. And that's what we're going forward with.
Well, I think you stumbled onto a great topic that is not a simple topic. If it was simple, it would have been, figured out a long time ago. And just one that's just very timely. I mean, you can tell when accountability is absolutely not in place and failed. I mean, all you have to do is go listen to a government hearing in front of Congress and just, what happened with the Secret Service. And literally congressperson after congressperson said, who's accountable, who made the decision, and not a single answer showed any account. Well, we have policies, we have standards, we have this team, we have, wait a minute, who's account? I think one guy asked like 32 times, who's accountable, and there was no answer. Well, that person had to resign the next day because their job as, our job as leaders, and I'm sure this is part of it, is to create an environment of healthy accountability in your words. And so it's obvious when it's not in place.
Yeah.
So I guess let's jump into just what are some really practical steps that organizations can do, people can do to try to, encourage healthy accountability.
First of all, anybody who's listening through you or through me, paul@goodleadership.com, we can send the executive summary of that journal that you just referred to a little bit. We're sharing that information very freely. There's a whole bunch of data in there. Most of our clients start out as do-it-yourselfers. They try to take our and do it themselves, and then they call us when it's too slow or too difficult. There are easily identifiable things at each one of those steps on the pathway. The two things I can think of right off the top of my head. Whatever you have to do in your business unit or in your corporate or at the corporate level, narrow to 3 priorities. Narrow to 3 priorities, and then communicate them consistently every single month for an entire year and be honest about how we're doing on them. The vast majority of people are not doing this, but when it is done, there's a huge statistical boost, 2x, about how people think about accountability. That's the simplest thing ever. It's not easy to get there, but it is proven by our research that is a huge thing in order to improve how people feel about accountability. And then the second thing has to do with teaming. I think from an employee standpoint, it feels amazingly unfair that every team that they're on is led differently.
Yeah.
There are some things that teams need. And we're starting to get this bold. We're saying to our CHROs, our chief operating officers, it should be no longer acceptable for people to lead teams however they want to. There are certain things that high-performing teams need. Pick a model, whether it's Lencioni or creative. Pick a model and make everybody use it.
Yeah.
Because then
the Navy SEALs don't let every team figure out their own ways of working. There's very clear guidelines and values and principles and whatnot, right?
Yep.
Techniques.
And collaboration and flexibility is a beautiful thing, but basketball without the lines on the floor would be total chaos. And that, I think that's part of what we learned in this is that people they do want to be accountable. They want to be a part of high-performing teams, but sometimes it takes forever to figure out what does that mean on this team versus that team.
Yeah.
Those are the things off the top of my mind.
I'm curious. It just makes me think of something, Paul. I had a chance to talk with this. Have you heard his book, Turn the Ship Around?
Oh, yeah.
David Marquet.
Oh, yeah.
He was on the podcast, and one of the things that we talked about, and he got into a situation where he had to sort of implement intent-based leadership because he had to, because he wasn't the expert and he couldn't tell them what to do on this nuclear class submarine. And so what he found the key was, and I'm curious if you've found this as well, is that language is critically important. So if he used the old military language, they would just simply wait for the order. Didn't matter what he said. So he had to change the language. And I kind of think in this case, like, how do leaders change the language so it's encouraging, collaborative, supportive versus I'm going to hold back because it sounds like if I commit to this, I might be like getting myself in trouble, getting fired, getting whatever, right? So how does that play into it?
Well, I'll tell you what, under the concept of finding and rewarding the growth in people, one of the things that we really loved was this idea that there's low accountability language and high accountability language. Low accountability is, I'm on it, I got it, don't worry, it'll happen, we're working on it, or tell me what you need me to do. High accountability language is, you'll have it by end of day, we're behind, I need 2 more days, do you want what I have so far? I need your help solving for something before I can do this, or I know we need to renegotiate a new deadline because this is way harder than we thought.
Yeah.
And so even around here at Good Leadership, this little firm we've been having lots of hallway chuckles because ever since we did this, we are noticing how many emails come back. I'm on it. I got this. Don't worry. And we're
Eat your own dog food, Paul.
I know it. And we're like, nope. And so we have a shared commitment around here to call that out.
Yeah.
and to say, what does that mean actually? What do you have and when will I get it? And so it's really fascinating. Language has so much to do with that. That's in leadership is about influence, and certain languages pull you in and other languages push you away.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, that's glad that you shared that, because I think if we try to do new things, instilling new behaviors, new mindsets, but we use the old language, it really doesn't work. Our brain just goes, I'm not buying it, right? It's just immediate. So good stuff. Well, hey, we are at the end of our time here, but the last question normally, Paul, is about this, looking back and what would you tell yourself? And you've already answered that question once. First, I'm going to ask you, do you remember what your answer was?
Yeah, I think I said something about how, well, no, I'm confused now. I do a lot of these podcasts. I had something else in my head, so I don't remember what I said.
Well, your answer was be patient. And, this whole concept of about 1% better you love, because, what you ended up building over your career, all of a sudden, you had an epiphany, but it took years and years and years. So be patient. And I think this accountability thing was building for a long time, even maybe longer than you thought it was. And all of a sudden it's a big topic and you can present on it. So that was your answer.
Thank you.
So my question to you is, has anything changed with what you would, your sort of life lessons, anything you would add to that statement?
There definitely is. And that is that no matter how good we think we are with framing things, explaining things, and asking people to do things for us, the articulation is not nearly as powerful as what was heard and understood. And so I made a shift mid-year this year. We were working on some very ambiguous things, some client things in this research project, where I now end every interaction with people by saying, hey, what did you hear from this? And what are you going to do? And what comes back to me 40% of the time is not what I thought we were talking about.
Isn't that something?
Yep. And so, if people don't understand you, it's actually your problem, not theirs.
Right.
And that's something I've kind of lived my life by for years and years and years, but especially now as our firm is growing, we're dealing with more complex things, more ambiguity. I have to be much less, I've got to take less time to frame things, be clear, but then ask, what did you hear? What are you thinking? Yeah, that has really been probably my number one shift as a leader. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's powerful, Paul. And it's like an adage that we've all, probably heard, but how important that is. Like, I can just, as you were describing that, I can remember myself and people that I work with so many times last year ago. I was disappointed. I thought I explained it. I thought we agreed. I thought this, and then it didn't happen. And I was disappointed in them. But this all ties back to accountability. I need to be accountable, not that I said something or thought that I articulated something, but I need to be accountable that they understood it. That's my accountability, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that we understand things the same way. And so, it's, you can't be committed until you know what you committed to.
Yeah, good stuff. Well, thanks, Paul. It's been a great, I know we just kind of skimmed the surface, but certainly a great topic. And thanks again for being on 1% Better.
You're welcome. I really appreciate it. And congratulations on keeping this going.
Thanks, Paul.